I'm Mike Kelly from the Project Healing Waters Omaha program, and tonight we're going to tie our first of the Christmas series in December, Royal Coachman. And for materials, first I'll show you the fly. So this is a Royal Coachman wet fly. So the history of this actually starts with another fly. So I believe John is familiar with this one. This is the lead-wing coachman. And Tom Bosworth of England was a carriage driver, or coachman they called it, for British monarchs from King George IV to Queen Victoria. He created a series of flies in the 1830s. The first had a peacock curl body, brown hackle, and white quill wings. He later added a natural gray mallard quill wing and called it the lead-wing coachman. The flies made their way to the United States and became very popular. Mary Orvis Marbury wrote in 1892 that the coachman was perhaps the most favorite of any fly in America. The Royal Coachman was reportedly created by, in 1878, by a professional fly dresser named John Haley. He was in New York. A client asked him for some coachman flies that would be extra strong. So he added a band of red silk in the middle of the body to prevent the delicate peacock curl from coming unwound. And in addition, in his own words, he said, "I have also added a tail of the barred feathers of the wood duck, and I think it makes a very handsome fly." So the Royal Coachman evolved into several other patterns. The Royal Trude, the Royal Wolf, and a bucktail streamer version. Tonight we're going to tie the wet fly version like this, and also a feather wing streamer version. So I'm going to switch to the materials. So for this one, we're going to use a wet fly hook. And for the wet fly, it's a smaller fly. Normally, the material sheets will call for floss for the red band. Instead of taking 4-strand floss and stripping one strand from it, a lot of the heavier threads that you can get, like 140 denier or heavier of ultra thread, is very similar to the floss. The tail is, again, in his original, he used barred wood duck feathers. And lately, probably over the last 100 years, the Royal Coachman has used a tail of golden pheasant tippets. Now, normally you get the tippets in, when you order them, you'll get like a golden pheasant crest, a head and crest. So it'll have these crest feathers over the top of the head. And then along the back of the head, where hackle is normally on a chicken, you'll have these tippets, and they come to a flat edge. And so I basically harvested all the feathers from that head, so I didn't have that to pick them off of the head every time. I could just pull them out of that envelope. The wing is done with quill wings from a duck, and I'll show you how that's all selected. And then the red band will be with tying thread on the smaller fly. And then I switched to black thread normally to get a black head. So switch to the vise. This is a size 10 wet fly hook. I'm mainly using a size 10 to just give us a little better picture for the camera. So I'm going to start actually with this 140 denier ultra thread. This UTC ultra thread will flatten, and that's partly one of the reasons that I use it for this. So I'm going to start a little ways back from the eye and just start wrapping as smooth a body as I can. Now, to flatten the thread, if you spin the bobbin counterclockwise as you look down on it, that'll flatten the thread. Now, if you can tell, right here, the thread is, it's made up of several strands, and it flattens to where you can cover the hook smoothly and a little more quickly than if your thread was corded up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the tag at this point. And then I'm going to go back to the end of the shank, which when you let the thread hang will be right at the barb. And that's where I'm going to tie in the tail. So the tail again is golden pheasant tippet. And if you look at this feather, of course, down at the bottom, like on any feather, you have a lot of fluff. That's not very usable material. But you also notice along the top, you've got some varying widths of the band up there on the end. So I usually like to take a few of those away because out on the edges, it curves down significantly. So I just kind of like to make that a little bit more smooth of a grouping. Now, in America, people like materials. You're going to see a lot of these flies tied with a real thick tail. You really don't need that many of these fibers, but you want to pull them away to where you can separate them, but keep the tips nice and even like that. So because this is a long feather that I selected, I've got quite a bit of material to work with. So I'm going to cut that away. And then, so actually it looks like I've got about maybe 10 fibers there. And I want the tail to be about the length of the shank of the hook. And if you look at that black band, that's about where that starts. So I'll just move that black band back to where the thread is. And I'll tie that in with a good tight wrap. And then I'm going to go ahead and keeping my thread as flat as possible here. I'm going to go ahead and wrap toward the front. And before I get to the end there, I don't want any bumps and lumps. So I'm going to come in here and cut at an angle. See how I'm holding those ends at an angle, but then I'm coming in flat with my scissors. So that cuts that material at an angle. So it's not going to leave a big bump. Now, the butt of the fly is going to be peacock herl. So I'm using a strung peacock curl. Like you can see that. And I'm just going to pull one nice full hurl out of the package. A lot of times on a peacock curl body, I'll use 2 or 3 hurls, and I'll twist them to get the bulk that I need. On a fly like this, it's a little more decorative. That's just going to add too much material there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take this about an inch and just break that off, because the tips are usually real brittle. And I'm going to try to orient this feather on the back. I'm going to try to show this on the camera if I can. The way that a peacock curl is situated, you have a dense stem on one side of the feather, and then the other side is all just the barbules that hang off. So I want to set it to where that thicker stem is facing towards me. And if you look at this, the way this is situated, the little barbules that hang down they stick straight out from the stem, and they seem longer. The ones on the top are more folded down at an angle. So I want that to actually be on the top. So I'm going to use my flat thread, spinning it counterclockwise, and I'm going to come back to that end right there. Now I'm going to spin it clockwise a little bit, as if you were looking down on it, so that I have a nice corded up thread, so it's nice and strong. And keeping those long flat fibers hanging down, I'm going to tie that in and take a couple wraps forward. Now, when I take this peacock curl, first I'm going to take some wide wraps just to get this up toward the eye of the hook, and it's out of my way. So starting at the tail, I'm going to start taking wraps, touching as close as I can, so that stem or rachis in the middle of the feather there is toward the front. And then every time I make a wrap, it basically covers that. I want to make a tuft there at the back. Now I'm going to back my thread up to where I can tie that off. I'll take about 3 good wraps here. And then holding my thread tight, I'll just snap back toward the back and break that away. Now I want to spin counterclockwise to flatten that thread again. And then I want to wrap forward to where I'm about 2 eye lengths back from the eye of the hook. So if I look at the eye length right there, there's 1 and there's 2. So now I want to take that feather again, that peacock curl, look at my orientation again. And I want to tie that in again. I'm going to take a couple wraps back because I was a little bit shy of actually, I'm going to go a little bit farther, because there's one thing with this front section of peacock curl that by the time you tie the hackle and the wing, you end up kind of swallowing up a lot of that peacock curl. So I'm going to make a little bit wider, a little bit thicker of a band of peacock herl here on the front. And that's to make up for all of that. So you see how that's a little more dense of a bump up there. So now I'm going to cover over that peacock herl a little bit, snap it off. And then I have a pretty good space there toward the eye. And I want that to be nice and flat. So there's 2 steps on here now. And one of them that I like on this type of a fly, this is a hairline hen cape. And the color of it, they always call for a brown hackle. And to me, this hen hackle is like a nice, rich mahogany brown. It's just a beautiful color. And I like to use that for that throat more than like a speckled brown. So I'm going to come about to the middle of the neck here, and I want to hold it up there, and I want to kind of gauge where I want the fibers to be right toward the point of the hook. So if I was to bend this like that, that's a little bit long of a feather. So now I want to go further up the neck here, a little bit further up toward the head, and select a different one. Maybe right in here. And then that looks like it's right about right. So these hen hackles are soft, webby, and they just have that rich brown color. So I'm going to start at the tip here, and I'm going to pull some of this back to where I have these fibers pointing backwards. They're kind of pointing straight out. I just want to isolate that tip. I actually had 2 feathers there. So I want to isolate out that tip. And then I want to spin my bobbin clockwise as if I was looking down on it. Cord up the thread. And I want to take a couple of good tight wraps, maybe 4. And then take that hackle tip and bend it back and take a few more wraps and then come toward the eye of the hook. Now I'm going to actually make a little bit, see how I made kind of a smooth thread base there? Now I'll take that tip, and because I wrapped back over it, I can just snap that out of there. Now, I'll take my thumb and finger and fold these feather barbs backwards. And then I want to try to get about 3 or 4 wraps here. There's 1. Stroke them back. 2. 3. 4. And then I'll tie that stem off nice and tight and break it away. You can cut it if you're not feeling brave. Now, with these, there's 2 ways to tie this fly. You can either go ahead and put the wings in now and let the hackle work all the way around that fly. Or you can stroke them down like this. And you need to try to work them around that peacock and get it to where they're hanging straight down. And then take a thread wrap over it, maybe a second one, to hold that all down. Now I'll wrap that a little bit forward. And at this point, I'm going to just do a 2-turn whip finish to get rid of that red thread. Now I'll switch to a black thread. Now I only took a few turns over that, but I'm going to be doing a lot of wrapping here in the next step. Now I'm going to switch cameras here and show you about the wing. So with the duck quills, a lot of people try to get matched quills, matched pairs. But the most important part is not that they're the exact same spot on the left and the right side of the wing. But you can see that these two feathers oppose each other. So this is the shiny, the outside of the feather, but they oppose each other. These oppose each other. And that's more important. So you can see where I've made several cuts along here over the years of different wings. So you basically want to take, let me grab another one of these hooks. The best way to get the right size wing is to take a hook, hold it right up against the feather like that, press it down, and then run it through there. So now that separated that section. I can cut that loose and I'll set that on the pedestal of the vise. And then I want to go to the other feather, do the same thing. Take that hook, hold it against the feather, run it out like that. And then I'll cut it loose. So now I've got my two wings. And I want them to be with their, I want them to be even, of course, in length. So I just adjust them until they're even. And I can also see that this has about 2 or 3 too many fibers on the bottom here. So I'm going to pull those away. Make sure they're even. And then I'm going to do what's called a pinch wrap. So I'll pull the thread up alongside of that feather, alongside of that wing, the two wings there. And then with slack, I'll pull that thread in on the other side. So the wing hasn't collapsed yet, but I have thread on each side of it. So now I'm going to bring that back up so it's wrapped around completely, and then keeping tension on it, I'm going to pull up on the thread. Then I'm going to take another wrap. I'm still keeping tension on that wing. And so now, if I turn it forward, that should be, now actually that kind of did roll a little bit sideways. So it's not completely on the top of the hook right there. So I'm going to back up. And I'm going to try that again. Get my wings situated. I want it to be about halfway down the tail. And that looks a little better. Take another couple wraps over that pretty good. And then cut away that wing material. And I don't want a whole lot there at the eye. So let me try to get some of that out of there. Now, first thing I want to do is come back to the eye. And then start building that head up and come over those butts of the wing material. Then I'll do a whip finish. Cut the thread. And then add some UV glue to make a nice shiny head. Actually put a little bit too much on there. Draw some of that off with my bodkin. And then I'll hit it with the UV light. So to critique my own fly, I still got that wing a little bit further toward my side than I did on the other side. And my head is a little bit bulky. But when you're tying these types of flies, that's what happens. They don't always turn out great. So you do about 10 or 12 of them. And you put the prettiest ones in a shadow box and you put the rest in your fly box because the fish aren't going to care. And the first time you use this fly, once you get that wing wet, it doesn't matter how perfect your wing set was. Once you get that wing wet and then you make a couple of false casts, it's going to all shred.
And you know, Mike, if you really want to be a professional and tie for the circuit, you better get some measuring gauges and everything else. I mean, Al mentioned something last Friday. I can't remember what it was, but I've been doing some research on FFI and their fly tying competitions. I mean, they get micrometers out and measure every inch of the fly. And if it doesn't match up, the fly gets a bad rating. So it's
right. Now this would get a lot better rating because the wing is centered on the top. It's equal on both sides. the thread isn't as on the head. The thread isn't as bulky. That's a lot better rendition. I did that yesterday. Not yesterday, the day before yesterday.
Yeah, that's one you can put in your shadow box, but it's
right. And I'll
yeah.
fish with the other one.
There you go.
Now the next one, there's a couple different ways you can do it. And you can see the similarity. It's pretty much the same. Let me zoom out a little bit. Pretty much the same idea. Same materials, but it's a streamer. Has that rich brown throat, but it actually uses hackle tips as the wing. I also did one with, this is how a lot of people do it, with all red. So the thread, the head is red as well.
Mike, have you ever seen that tied with bucktail for the wing?
Or bucktail. You could also use a trude style fly. When Gretchen did a show for us about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, she did the Royal Trude. I think it was a Royal. It was a lime trude.
Yeah, lime trude.
So that would have a shorter hook shank, but it would have calf tail for the wing.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Or poly for the easy version, poly yarn. But it's basically the same thing. It's just a longer version. These are dynamite for crappie. They're dynamite for trout. Brook brown and rainbow in the Black Hills. In some of the streams. We used to use those streamers, and the Black Ghost is another one that's kind of similar with a white wing like that, but with black and yellow materials.
What is that, about a 6X?
4X.
4X long? Okay.
Yep, that's a 4X long. That's what I had handy. So I'll do this one. I'll start with black thread. With any floss body flies, it's usually a good idea to use white thread underneath, because when the fly gets wet, if there's black thread underneath, it will darken the floss. But the way I'm going to do this one, it's not going to be a factor. I still want to try to get a nice smooth body. So again, if you notice, I'm doing about a 90-degree hold on this tag of thread. So, and I'm doing my wraps at an angle like this. So every time I make a wrap, that pushes it against the wrap before it. So it's a nice fast way to get down the hook shank, especially a longer shank like this, and build yourself a nice thread base that's smooth, touching turns. We're going to go back to this same feather for some more of these tippet fibers. I'm going to take a goodly amount. Flip those free. And then trying to keep those tips aligned. I'm going to tie those in on top of the hook. Now on the streamer, you're not going to do a hook shank in length. Just for feel, usually I like to do, I guess that's maybe about a 3/4 of an inch, some way to measure it. But just to try to keep there's no way to do this material like this and have there not be a bump. So again, what I'm going to do here is leave myself enough to where I can take some of those fibers out. And that way it'll be a taper to where I don't really notice a bump there in the body. I'm going to come toward the front. And because this is a long shank where I'm using a floss, floss is kind of delicate. I have some red crystal flash, and you can use a fine red wire or like a fine holographic red tinsel. I just pulled it out of the thread there. Go back because I don't want to bump. And I'll get that started. Well, that's sitting back here in my material clip. I'm going to take this 4-strand Danville's floss, and I'm running out. I use this on a lot of streamer flies. I use that color of red. So I'm going to have to go shopping one of these days. I'm going to take about 2. This comes again in 4 strands. So I'm going to take 2 of the strands.
Mike, don't go buy some. I may have some over in the shed from the donations we got last year.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to take 2 of the strands out of the 4. That way I can do 2 flies out of this. And then making sure the tips are pretty well aligned. Just to make sure they are, I'm going to just cut those tips. And then I'm going to make a couple of wraps and maybe pull those, whoops, too far. Try this again. Couple wraps and just pull those tips to where they will kind of taper into that body. And then I'm going to hold them back here and wrap everything to the back. Spin my thread counterclockwise. Put these up in my material clip so they're not getting in my way. And this one. Now, again, give it a good spin. And with flat thread, you can see how that gives me a nice flat base there. Move that toward the front. Now I'm going to take those 2 strands of floss, wrap them around the hook, and I'm just going to stroke them to get all those little fibers aligned, and hopefully I have enough. And I didn't cut it too short. I think that's going to work out just about perfect.
Mike, have you ever tried using your rotary feature to do that?
Yes. I don't have my bobbin cradle right now. I took that off to get it out of the way for all the cameras and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you can do it without the bobbin cradle if you can control the bobbin itself.
Plan ahead, right?
Yep.
Gonna be about 1/8 of an inch short, it looks like.
I think I'm going to be just right. If not, you know what I'm trying to show you. This stuff doesn't really cost. You're right. It's about 1/4 of an inch short. I'm going to come back and grab that stuff and wrap it to the front. Now, I'm going to take this and probably do about 7 to 9 wraps here. Nice even spaced wraps. And again, that floss is kind of delicate. If you're using this for trout, the teeth are going to just shred that stuff. And I'm going to do this is how I planned it the whole time, was to do a nice red. Not going to work, is it? That'll at least buy me a little bit there toward the front. And then I'll tie that off. Then
That looks a little thick or a little wide to be Crystal Flash, Mike.
that's red Crystal Flash.
Okay.
White River Fly Shop is Bass Pro. Now Bass Pro and Cabela's.
Yeah.
But that stuff works really good in crappie jigs.
Yeah, it might be because I'm looking at a magnified screen,
Right.
So
Now there is a midge version of Crystal Flash that's a little bit more narrow. I'm going to use probably that. I think will look good. Isolate out the tip again. I want to spin my thread clockwise again to cord it up. And then I'm going to fold that back. And then break that tip off. Holding this up, I'll stroke those barbules to the back. It just wraps a little better if you can try to get them folded to where they're both pointing backwards. Like that. And then hold those back and hold it. Touching turns about 4 turns. Fold those back. Probably about enough. Now, again, I'll pull that beard downward. You know what? I didn't tie in the peacock curl. Why don't you stop me, John?
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I didn't even, I was so enthralled with what you were doing there that I just completely, yeah, I've never done that myself.
Well, I could put it at the front.
Well, you know what I would do? I would put it at the back with super glue and let it go.
I will put it at the front and call this a no butt Royal Coachman Streamer. All right.
Who knows? Maybe you've got a pattern here that will just really,
It could be.
you know,
So I'm going to grab one of these hurls. I'll grab two. Then we'll do that throat again. John, I can't believe you made me do that.
I know. And it's all my fault.
It's all your fault.
All my fault. Yep.
I noticed that hackle was so easy to pull down that last time. I didn't have to worry about the peacock curl.
Yeah, I was wondering about that myself. I said, there's something not right here. This is coming down way too easy.
Something so much easier.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll just call this the no hurl Royal Coachman.
Right. So I want to try to get it around the back there. Okay. So there's my throat. And then I bought sorry for the bump of the camera there. I bought these cheaper dry fly rooster necks. They're actually what they call Indian hackle.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're low quality, very cheap. You can get one of these for about $8 or $10. But I'm not using this for dry flies, so I don't care the quality. What I care about is that it's a pretty good color of white for wing material. So I'll come up in here about in the middle for this size 8 hook and try to grab two of them that are pretty close in size and then pop them off of the neck. Then I'll just take those and try to line them up as close as possible. Now these are, laid against each other for right now, but I just want to kind of get a judge of the length. So I want it to be right about to the tail. So I'm going to take all of this back here and just strip it off.
I can remember when Whiting Farms hackle was an inexpensive hackle too. So.
Right. Now in the, 50s and even 60s, a lot of the flies that were tied, you didn't have the genetic hackles that had all the,
No.
close barbules and stiff dry fly hackle. So you had to use sometimes 2 or 3 hackles to
Yeah. And in those,
hackle a fly.
meth was about the only decent hackle you could buy, and Whiting Farms was just starting up, and they were okay, but they were about like the Indian hackle is today.
So right there looks like a pretty good wing, and that's 2 hackles put concave sides together so that they cup towards each other, and it makes a nice thin, like a knife blade kind of thing. You can see I've got the 2 lined up pretty good there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off the rest of that feather to where I have some stems sticking out about like that. And if you take where the holes are in your scissors and just kind of press down a little bit, you'll flatten that stem somewhat. And that kind of helps keep it on top and not roll around. I'm going to take a couple of soft wraps first and see how I'm set. And then do some tighter wraps. And that looks pretty good. Now, you see how that's like pointed upwards? So I'm going to take some softer wraps toward the back. And that's going to try to push that down. And then take some toward the front. I want to get rid of these stems before I go too much further. And go to the eye, wrap over those stems, and shape the head. And you want to make sure that's nice and tight. And then we'll whip finish. And we have a 1 hurl Royal Coachman Streamer. Now with a long hook like this, sometimes it's helpful to just stick that in the eye to help you get that nice and tight.
I think that was a trick that Al taught us last week, was it?
And then I love streamers with the UV glue for the head.
Yeah.
I
I've got
just think
some I
that-
bought by accident, Mike, that's gray, and I haven't tried it yet. So I may have to try some of that gray color UV.
Right. The black, a lot of times they use it on little midge flies and stuff where they want a black wing case.
Yeah.
That's become pretty popular.
Yeah.
And the light. Roll it around a little bit so it doesn't drip. This Christmas version of the Royal Coachman doesn't have a peacock hurl butt.
Well, it looks more Christmassy that way.
Yeah, that's it.
What UV stuff are you using, Mike? What glue?
So I have 2. Loon has a that's the first one that I bought. Flow is a thinner viscosity, I guess you would call it. They also have a thick if you're trying to build up like a clear back on scud flies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then Al bottled some of this 3D printer fluid.
Right
he bought
here.
a big bottle of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you bought a big bottle of it.
I bought
Uh,
this by, yeah, this is that gray I was talking to you about. It's a
Oh,
1
okay.
gram. It's
Right.
2.5 pounds of
This
this
was
stuff. So if anybody needs any, let me know.
right. Al called this Easy Flow,
Yeah,
and it's a 3D printer fluid. And I
yeah,
will say that one thing with this loon stuff, if you touch it, you can see there's a little bit of oily residue on my
yeah.
finger. It's fully hardened, but it leaves a little bit of an oily residue. A lot of people will coat that with Sally Hansen's after they're done,
Yeah.
and that kind of takes that away. But the that stuff, that 3D printer fluid, when you hit it with that UV light, that stuff does not have any residue.
No, and it's glossy and it's hard and I bought another bottle of it of clear, which isn't 2 kilograms. It's about 1 kilogram. So
Right.
also got all kinds of that if you need any more.
I kind of like that red rib there.
I
I
do
just
too.
thought of that. I just thought of that when I was getting the stuff out tonight.
I really,
Matter of
yeah,
fact, I think on a lot of my red-bodied flies, I'll do that,
yeah,
because even with crappie and bluegill bass, um, once they are fighting a little bit, by the time you get it in, that floss starts to kind of pull away.
yeah. Might also be kind of cool to put some eyes on that.
You could if the head was a little bigger.
Yeah,
But that's what we've got. And it was just about an hour.
yeah, it was.